Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this tutorial we are going to be creating a glitchy transition fading intro video clip with sound effects. It's something that's very popular at the moment and it's something that inspired me. I'm Ash, and on this tutorial we will be adding noise and distortion effects to artwork, adjusting the effects using keyframes, and simultaneously making sure these animations work in harmony with sound. So, a quick overview. We have our audio clip and we have our artwork that we have put together on the last tutorial. There will be a link somewhere on the page. So we have our elements, and focusing on the music for a second. At the very beginning of this clip, there's a strong amount of static. Now that's perfect to add our noise and distortion effects to our artwork. And what I plan to do is I plan to add the effects at the beginning of our artwork, and then as the music goes along, I would like the effects to fade out, thus creating a solid shape in the artwork. So the first thing we want to do is we want to isolate the piece of audio we want to animate to. So I'm just going to click on this part and I'm going to play the music, and then I'm going to find the point where the beat of the music kicks in, and we're just going to isolate it. So to zoom in, I can tell that the static was this section here. This small part of the graph is the static, then the beat kicks in this larger part of the graph. So I'm just going to create my marker using the out. So what we're going to do is, on our artwork, I want to add distortion effects. So just to remind you of the artwork, the bottom layer is our logo, and the top layer is just 2 letters of the logo. We're going to be adding effects to the whole thing. So both layers we're going to add effects to. So to start with, we're going to use the wave warp. So in the effects panel, search wave warp, and we're going to drag this onto our bottom layer of our graphic and our top layer. And we're also going to add some noise. So type noise, I'm going to drag this bottom version of the noise onto both layers, the bottom layer and the top layer. So the plan is, like I said before, to have a large amount of noise and distortion using our wave warp, and then as the timeline comes along, I want all them effects to decrease and form the natural solid shape. So we're going to do that using keyframes. So I'm going to come into our bottom layer, and in the effects control, here's our keyframes timeline. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag all the way to the end, so at the very end where I want the shape to form a solid shape, where I want no effects, and I'm going to go into the wave warp, and I'm going to set these to 0, effectively taking off any effects, and I'm going to add them as keyframes. Now I'm going to drag our timeline to the start, and here is where I'm going to increase the height, and I'm going to increase the wave width. I'm going to go with something like a 3, and I'm actually going to increase this hugely. I want it to just be coming off the screen, yeah, something like that. So now on our keyframes, what we have is we've set our height and our width 4, 3, 6 and width 3, and then we've come along the timeline to the point where we want the artwork to form to a solid shape, and then we've added 0 to our wave warp. I hope that makes sense. We're going to do this with the top layer as well. So we would like to have the same level of effects on both layers. So 4, 3, 6 and 3, I must remember them. At the start, of the timeline, I'm going to add 436, and I think it was 3, and we're going to add them as keyframes. So I'm just going to click on these little circles. These little diamond shapes indicate that we've added a keyframe, and I would like to drag my timeline to the point where we want the shape to form solid, which is there. And then I want to add a keyframe to say I want no distortion on this section, so I'm going to put them to 0. The lowest you can go is 1. So there we have it. We have keyframes to both layers, creating a large amount of distortion with the wave warp effect, and as the time goes along, that effect decreases over the time lapse and comes to 0, so it forms a solid shape. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to add some noise. So I'm going to come back to the beginning of our timeline. I'm going to select our bottom layer, and this time I am going to look at the noise effect that we added, and I'm going to add 100%, and I'm going to add a keyframe. Then I'm going to take our timeline all the way along. It should match, should align with our other keyframes, and at the point where we want our distortion to come to an end and form a solid shape. And I'm going to put this to 0, so no noise, add a keyframe. That was a mistake, the keyframe already added, I didn't need to press the button that time. So what we have is 100% noise, and as the time goes along, the noise goes to 0. And I'm going to do this with the layer above as well. So I'm going to come to the start of our timeline. I'm going to go to noise, and I'm going to say 100%, and I'm going to click on the button, add in our keyframe, and I'm going to drag our timeline across to align with our other 2 keyframes, and at the point where we want the noise to go to 0, and I'm going to drag this to 0, noticing that the diamond is added, indicating that the keyframe has been added. So now on both layers we have 100% noise, and as the timeline goes along, the noise decreases. And if you watch it as the time goes along, when I play this, that 100% will decrease to 0 as we go along. Watch it, see, goes to 0. So there you have it, some simple distortion effects. So now I would like to add some opacity to our 2 layers. I'm going to start with the bottom layer, and in the effects controls we have opacity. Opacity is a standard effect, you don't have to add it in the effects panel. And I'm going to drag this down to 20%, and we have our keyframe added. And then I'm just going to drag along the timeline. I'm personally going to add it in between these 2 keyframes. I'd like the opacity to reach 100 earlier. So I'm going to drag this to 100%. Keyframe is added. And I'm going to do the same thing with the layer above. Drag our timeline back to 0. Select 20%. Enter. Our keyframe is added. Drag our timeline kind of in between these 2 keyframes, and pop this to 100. So now we should have both our layers having 20% opacity, as you can see, and then as we come along the timeline, the opacity increases along with the other 2 effects that we have, creating this glitchy transmission styled intro effect. So now I would just like to play what we have so far, and if you followed along from the first tutorial, you get a chance to see the whole thing in one go. And that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching till the end. In the corner is the next tutorial where I'll show you how to do a very simple text reveal technique. See you on the next one.